So this is kind of the premise of what we're asking. And it's a risk. It really is a risk. We don't think about expanding our networks as a risk, but it's like going to school, first day of school, reaching beyond the people you already know. It's hard and highly uncertain. But this is what the real benefits here for caregivers like us. It's gives you an opportunity to begin giving voice to what can't be stated to friends and family. By reaching out and beyond your existing networks, you can begin to see yourself and your experiences in ways that you haven't allowed yourself to fully appreciate. What we're saying is not just finding new people to talk about, it's finding new ways to discover yourself. It's finding new ways to find meaning about your experiences. So it's not just about the friends, it's not just about opening your network. It's new ways of understanding what's happening to you and what it means.
Yeah, it's so important to have fresh eyes on the situation and on yourself. Because, and as you say, Zachary, it's not either or, but, we talk a lot in the book. I've been thinking about this a lot recently too. So there's a philosopher and the mother of an adult woman with very severe disabilities. And this philosopher's name is Eva Kate. And Eva talks about the idea of the caring, transparent self. And the caring, transparent self is that idea that you're always watching the person you love, that you're always sensing if they're thirsty or hungry, and you give them a drink of water, but you forget to have one for yourself. You're always somewhere out in front. Your whole consciousness is actively empathizing, and this is this part of hypervigilance where you become transparent to yourself and sometimes to others. So in order to be seen as you truly are in your caregiving role, sometimes it does take fresh eyes.
It really does. And it just provides another way of seeing yourself, just another reflective moment. And so while we're talking here, we're talking about, as you say, Donna, given the givens, what can we do? And this is given the givens that for many of us as caregivers, we are situated in a place, and our ability to negotiate multiple spaces outside the home may be complicated in many ways. So we're drawing on our own experiences as well as research in what online networks can do, and we're situating that in the context of caregivers. So these are ways that help develop the caregiver vocabulary, and the audience, when we go online to find a caregiver network that is meaningful, what we do, Donna, differently than we can do in face-to-face interactions, for example, is that we lean in with similarity. When we know that we're going to the caregiver space to find fellow caregivers, we lean in with similarity because the category of caregivers tells us that this person is likely to understand approximately my experiences. Contrast that with a face-to-face experience where you lean in on difference. How are you different from me physically and visually? When we go online, we have a very different persona that we can create, and we lean in with similarity. So much research has been done about this idea that we seek out similarity and we interpret what someone is saying and how we interact them through a prism of similarity rather than difference. Likewise, if we go onto the caregiver's living room, Donna's wonderful website and opportunity on Facebook as well is you'll see a capacity to be able to share unedited some of your lived experiences in your own time. I mean, this is twofold. Face-to-face, it's spontaneous, and you're measuring the eloquence in the moment. Like, how good am I responding to my brother-in-law, who I don't like very much, right? So how quick-witted am I? Versus online, you can type in your own making and respond in your own making. And you can share to this caregiver group in ways that their tolerance for absorbing what you're saying and receiving what you're saying will be so much greater than those whom you must edit, because we always edit when we speak and share with those we care about most.
Yeah, there's a big freedom in talking to a stranger that you have something profoundly in common with.
The orientation towards openness and the idealization of that person really facilitates sharing in ways that doesn't happen when you're interacting with someone that you perceive to be different from you. That shuts off sharing. Opening up to commonality, it really gets that sharing function going. And you know what? Caregivers, we need to feel as if we have control of something. And when you share in an online network, then you can focus on what you want to present. You're not responding to what others think you should be saying or not saying. You have control to present yourself and your situation and your responses to those situations in your words, in the way that you want it, not in the way that you think others need you to have it or want you to have it or bend your story. But it's an amazing capacity to begin the process of care vocabulary, because for the first time, you might be seeing how you're representing your experiences. You don't get that necessarily with family and friends.
Yeah. And, you know, I just said, I probably misspoke. I used the word stranger, and sometimes we are speaking to strangers in online caregiving support groups, or even face-to-face caregiving support groups. But we begin with the point of similarity. It's always beginning with the point of similarity. And I have to mention that I have been talking to other caregivers, seeking out people who had a similar care experience to me from the very beginning of the internet. And now I have friends that I met in the earliest of the bulletin boards. This was really mostly about our son, rare symptoms, couldn't understand why, you know, many medical complications. And these people, our kids are like all grown up now, and some of the children have passed away, but I am still really, really, really close friends with these other mothers whom I've never met. We exchange Christmas presents, remember our kids' birthdays together, and we are friends because of our shared care experience. And that is our point of beginning, middle, and end. That is the totality of our friendship. So, you know, you can say something online on a support group to somebody you've never met, and you may never speak to them again. But the possibility is also there to create a real relationship, and a meaningful one, even though you may never meet them.
So well said. These are not fictive relationships because they're online. They can be as in more equally or more intense than any face-to-face interaction that happens. And the arc of that friendship can develop in ways that are magnified because of these qualities that make possible the sharing of disclosure, the revealing of these truths that you live that people closest to you may not know because you don't have they're not the audience that you can share and reshape. So and who better to develop these relationships and in the process begin to understand ourselves so that eventually we can go back to our friends and family with a renewed sense of vocabulary and a greater way of articulating our experiences. But these are kind of the tools that we have available to us that are online that may not be available to us in person. You know, one challenge that we all face in everyday life, but even more so for caregivers, is that we can better understand how we're doing. We talked on in the book, there's no graduation for caregivers. There's no celebrations. There's very few public rituals other than your own making. There's no feedback in this role unless you seek out others who are in similar caregiving situations. Your family and friends can try to tell you you're doing great or not great, but you're not likely going to listen to them or heed what they're saying because you just, well, you say that because you're my mom, or you say that because you're my friend. Whereas these are people that you interact with online in caregiver support groups who are farther along the path, who you listen to because their experiences shape what they're saying in profound ways.
Yeah, and you can be openly ambivalent. You can you can say, this, this awful thing happened in my house today. But, 1 minute or less later, you could be cracking a joke
That's right.
about something. It's not, and everybody is crying, oh my God, ha ha ha, ha, like right back to back. And I tell you what, it's caregivers who really get that.
That it means you're in a community when you can say something that friends and family might consider taboo, and you can experience laughter by a type of ownership of that experience. I've seen that so much, and there's nothing more gratifying, because you spend most of your life as a caregiver trying to edit so others don't look at you askew, like, how can you say such a thing?
Yeah, that's right. Zachary, I just want to mention a few people in the chat box are asking about some support websites and groups where they can go for what we're talking about. And we have a slide coming up in 1 second, don't we?
Yep, we'll have a slide where we highlight some really great ones, and you'll see Donna on all of those. Donna is one of the most prolific caregiver support devotees. I mean, she really a gift, and so. But it's a small community, but it's a large community, and partly because it does promote a kind of dialogue that you can't have with people who don't know how to have a dialogue about experiences that are relevant to caregivers. And so you replace the cliches when you walk into a really meaningful caregiver support group online. You replace those with actual questions and listening and probing, rather than a kind of smothering of your experiences and putting out the fires with a cliche. And you know what, Donna? This is something that you provide so much when you interact with, and you receive as well, I know, the kind of more objective and experienced perspectives. This is kind of social capital 101. I get to learn from people who have been there, who've done it, who are not thinking about it, but are in it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's mentoring, and it's the amount of knowledge and support and expertise and innovation that goes on in the caregiver community is absolutely unbelievable. If somebody at 3 a.m. posts an image they've taken on their phone of a rash on their father's arm, somebody in the Philippines is going to answer, or Arizona, and say, I've seen that before. Ask your doctor, if it's this. And if it's that, this is what happened in our family with that rash. Like, there's just, anybody know about a suction machine that doesn't have this glitch in it? Somebody's going to know. It's incredible. How to repair oxygen tubing with duct tape when you're on a city bus. It's incredible what people share and how much knowledge there is. It's the great untapped resource.
This informal role of caregiving never gets the credence of being able to call someone an expert and an innovator, but you just did, and you're absolutely right. Because it's an informal role, it's discounted. Well, there can't be an expert because it's not, you don't go to school for this thing. But oh my goodness, you are highlighting the idea that the people here gathered together, innovators on your own experiences, you have had to work around, and you always talking about working around things that caregivers do in ways that are just so profound that would be envied by any engineer or by any .com entrepreneur, but for the fact it happens in the private world. And to be able to leverage the social and emotional innovations that caregivers have rendered and live in, and to give people permission to know the boundaries of, we don't have boundaries. We don't know how to create those boundaries, but listening to someone like you, Donna, I can get a better sense of where those boundaries were for you and your family and how you negotiated those. But if I don't have access to that information, and it's not tainted by the fact that you've known me for 25 years, it really gives me a map. It's not my territory, but it gives me a map.
That's right.
And here it is. It's the beginning of the development of a caregiver vocabulary. There's no vocabulary list, but what it is, where you find free and open disclosure and sharing of experiences, you will find the blooming of a landscape described in language that works for you and your loved one, that is born from your own experiences rather than borrowed from other people's cliche.
One of the premises, like the premise of our book, The Unexpected Journey of Caring, is the fact that if you can find the words to describe your experience, and you discover and develop your own caregiver vocabulary, then you will be able to act effectively and proactively in the community on behalf of yourself, the person you're caring for, and your family, and at work and out in the community. So basically, that's the idea that we began with. If you've got the words to describe, then you can begin to think about acting differently and getting different outcomes and feeling different emotions too.
Yes. Most people start with the premise of, I want understanding from my existing networks. Our premise is very different, that we must go to those who understand the experience to begin the process so that we can articulate it in a way that is meaningful for us. Then you go back to your networks, that pre-caregiving networks, your workplace networks, your advocacy in the community, because it must emanate from a place of authenticity and lived experience rather than borrowing what others have recycled that worked for them. And it takes a little time to do this, but it's also remarkably rewarding in the development of a community, of a sense of place. And for those of you, just map out some of these quotes might make sense to you because they give empowerment. I mean, they are in actuality what we were just talking about in terms of some of these components. Online networks are convenient. At 3 a.m, Donna mentioned, you go on and you might be able to share something or receive something from someone else. The idea that, you don't have to edit out the so-called negative parts of your experiences, and knowing you have the freedom to be able to shape and share in ways that you want is empowering and necessary to that development of a care vocabulary. Not other people's vocabulary for you, not the vocabulary that works for the outside world, but your vocabulary. Well, when talking with others who don't have shared history with you, shared past is wonderful and enriching, but people you meet online in meaningful care networks, you can share a present with them and a future, and they help you begin to build your understanding of your own evolving values and what those experiences might be in shaping who you are and who you're becoming. We talk a lot about kind of face-to-face interactions, and someone can respond in the moment, and they say something quick, and we assume that saying something quick is meaningful. Online, I mean, Donna, I'm sure your conversations have spanned days, weeks, months with people.
Oh yeah, I love talking to other caregivers, and I love understanding more deeply what their burdens and joys are. It helps me reflect on my own situation and how to I often think of it as like looking at my life and what happened today, yesterday, 10 years ago, or anything that I happen to be experiencing or remembering. I think of it like as a prism. And when I talk to other people who may have had similar but slightly different experiences, I can turn that prism a little bit and look at my own life slightly differently and think, oh, I never thought of it that way. And that helps me absorb it and accept it, because so much is about accepting loss in caring, and dealing with what you thought yesterday was unimaginable and unacceptable. Like, I can never accept that that I would have a child who didn't walk, who didn't speak, who couldn't see. And all of a sudden those things are fine now, and I'm worried about the next thing. So I talked to another caregiver who's dealt with the next thing that I think I can't deal with it. And I find I can. So that's about turning that prism, I find.
The way we make sense is socially, and to divorce ourselves from the ability to meaningfully engage with others is an assault on the self, on our identity, on our way of making sense, as you said, of what's happening to us and what is shaping us. You know, and this last point I don't think can be underplayed is that we talked about the limitations of our friends and family networks. In part, that limitation is because we begin to see them as deficient in what they cannot provide. If, however, as we're talking about, you add to and complement your existing networks with online networks of caregivers, you will find yourself able to reflect and see, perhaps for the first time in a long time, what your family members and friends can provide you. That you see them not from the lens of absence, but the lens of presence. And that's a shift that will enrich those networks, but it takes both. It's really hard to value who's around you without being able to have that perspective that you were talking about, Donna.
Yeah, it's true. And it makes me think of Liz O'Donnell, who wrote Working Daughter, which is an excellent book, by the way, about caring for an aging parent when you're working. And she talks about her brother, that she was doing, as she said, everything for her mother, and she was the task-oriented one. So she was paying the bills and making sure the groceries and all that stuff. And her brother didn't do anything. She was really mad at him about that. Then she realized, okay, wait a second. I got to stop this head game with myself of blaming him for not being me. And I have to think, what is it is he good at? Well, he's always been the social one. He goes and stays with mom and he tells stories. That's all they do is talk. He doesn't do a darn thing except talk. And she suddenly realized that that was the greatest gift because it gave her true time off when she knew that her mother was happy, because her mother wasn't always happy when Liz was there going, Mom, I need you to do this. And so she really reframed her thinking about what her brother did and didn't do. And I think that's a good lesson for everybody.
Great example. Here are some resources. We talked about the caregiver space, Donna's page, the Caregivers Living Room, huddle.com, the Unprepared Caregiver. These are just a beginning of those, and you can also reach out to Donna for more of those. She's on Huddle actively. She's on the Caregivers Living Room. And what you're doing even today, you're modeling that. Our participants are modeling that in the way they're talking and learning from each other as we go. It is, it's so heartening to see because it's so valuable and cannot be underestimated, because if we underestimate this, then we deny the value of our experiences. And I think all of us are here today because we do wanting to value what we're doing and trying to understand how they fit into our lives.